Imagine looking up at the sky and seeing something that defies every law of physics you thought you understood. That's exactly what happened on March 12, 2026, at 9 UTC. This wasn't a weather event. It wasn't a strange atmospheric anomaly. It was something far stranger, a physics event that spanned the planet, visible from London to Cape Town, and even witnessed by millions of stunned residents in between. For 42 minutes, the sun didn't just shine, it split. A coherent, high-definition spectrum unfolded across the Earth, forming a rainbow so immense it covered the entire sunlit hemisphere. Not an arc, not a halo, but a planetary prism, a global shield of refracted light, something that should have been impossible. Picture standing in New York. Normally, sunlight is scattered randomly by water vapor. But on that day, the atmosphere behaved like a single, flawless diamond lens, bending light with unprecedented precision. NASA's GO-19 satellite captured the initial data, while the European Space Agency's MEOSAC confirmed it almost instantly. The refractive index of the upper atmosphere had shifted by a mere 0.004%. That sounds small, insignificant. But in the language of atmospheric physics, it is cataclysmic. To create a planetary-scale split of the solar spectrum naturally, you would need to saturate the stratosphere with billions of tons of perfectly hexagonal crystals simultaneously. Or, there is another possibility, an external object manipulating the sunlight before it even reaches the air. And that's precisely what 3 Atlas did. When the Jet Propulsion Laboratory received the data, the initial assumption was sensor error. Comets, chunks of ice, and rock simply do not act as optical lenses. They lack the geometric precision to refract sunlight into specific wavelengths across 12,000 kilometers. Yet, the numbers didn't lie. At 9:02 UTC, the Deep Space Network detected a massive spike in ionization around 3I Atlas. The object, 180 million kilometers away, influenced photons hitting Earth with laser-like precision, completely defying chaotic models of nature. To put it in perspective, the probability of a natural comet tail aligning perfectly between the Sun and Earth to create this global prism? 1 in 8.4 trillion. Statistically zero. Effectively impossible. And yet, it happened. Millions recorded it. The sky became a spectrograph. The real question isn't, what happened? We saw it. The question is, how? How can a celestial body bend light across an entire planet with such accuracy? This wasn't an anomaly, it was a message in light, requiring physics that far exceed anything a comet could produce. To understand the magnitude of the event, we turn to the data. This wasn't shaky smartphone footage from London streets. At 9:05 UTC, just 5 minutes after the rainbow appeared, NASA's Deep Space Climate Observatory, DS-COVER, positioned 1,000,000 miles from Earth, recorded a drop in solar intensity. But it wasn't a shadow, it was a filter. Specific frequencies of sunlight had been stripped from the atmosphere. Essentially, someone had placed an optical-grade prism directly in front of our planet. Think about the physics. A prism bends light because it is denser than air, slowing it and separating colors. To bend sunlight on a planetary scale, you would need a physical medium thousands of kilometers wide. Yet, radar sweeps between Earth and the Sun revealed nothing. No dust cloud, no debris from 3 Atlas, no detectable mass, and still, the light bent. By 9:12 UTC, 3 independent agencies, NASA, ESA, and the Very Large Telescope in Chile, cross-referenced data and reached the same shocking conclusion. The light hitting Earth wasn't just split, it was engineered. The prime number gaps in the spectrum, the crystalline atmosphere, and the controlled alignment of photons all indicated something far beyond a natural occurrence. Pause for a moment. For light to bend in a vacuum without a physical lens, you need either gravitational distortion like a black hole or an electromagnetic field so intense it manipulates photons. 3 Atlas is not a black hole, it's a comet, a small body of ice. Yet it produced a localized field capable of refractive manipulation from 180 million kilometers away. General relativity says this is impossible, but the data doesn't lie. And just as the rainbow began to fade, the physics continued to defy understanding. Atmospheric sensors recorded the air itself, aligning nitrogen and oxygen molecules snapping into coherent order like iron filings around a magnet. But there was no magnetic spike. No known mechanism in physics explains it. For 3 minutes, the air we breathed acted like a low-grade diamond, splitting light and bending it in ways humanity has only been able to recreate in laboratories at near absolute zero. This was no ordinary event. It was a demonstration of power, precision, and perhaps intention, and it all started with a rainbow. The visual spectacle of the rainbow was astonishing, but what followed was even more extraordinary. At 10:45 UTC, just 3 minutes after the rainbow had vanished, atmospheric sensors across the northern hemisphere recorded a phenomenon that defied everything we know about gas dynamics. The Earth's atmosphere, normally a chaotic system where nitrogen and oxygen molecules bounce randomly at thousands of miles per hour, suddenly aligned. For 180 seconds, the air above the Atlantic Ocean behaved as if obeying a single, coherent command. Scientists likened it to iron filings snapping into formation around a magnet. The molecules weren't just moving differently, they were organized, acting in unison, as if the atmosphere itself had become a single gigantic atom. Physicists call this a Bose-Einstein condensate, a state where matter acts like a single quantum wave. But such condensates only appear near absolute zero, in highly controlled laboratory conditions, with a few thousand atoms. And yet here it was, occurring in 5 quadrillion tons of air at room temperature, over a planetary scale. To force this alignment, you would need a magnetic field of around 100 Tesla, strong enough to rip iron from the human body and instantly destroy electronics. Yet Greenwich Observatory's magnetometers reported no spike. No known natural force could account for this. So how did it happen? The answer may lie in resonance, phonon resonance, to be precise. Certain frequencies of vibration can force matter into geometric lattices, creating structures that don't naturally occur at room temperature. Remember the prime number gaps in the rainbow spectrum? Those weren't missing colors, they were frequencies being absorbed by the air itself. 3 Atlas was broadcasting a resonance signal that transformed Earth's atmosphere into a giant optical crystal, turning the sky into a medium capable of splitting sunlight with laboratory-level precision. For 3 minutes, every breath of air had the optical properties of a low-grade diamond. The rainbow wasn't just bending light, it was refracting it through a structured lattice that should not exist outside of a quantum physics lab. And the consequences of this crystallization were immediate. Pilots flying over the poles reported sudden, total radio silence. Static disappeared, communication signals vanished. The aligned atmosphere acted like a fiber optic cable, transmitting light and electromagnetic waves perfectly along its lattice, while blocking all other signals. The probability of the atmosphere spontaneously achieving this crystalline state is astronomically low, 1 in 10 to the 50th power. In physics, anything beyond 10/50 is considered absolute impossibility. This wasn't luck. This was deliberate. Something or someone had forced our planet's atmosphere into a new phase of matter. And the scale of the energy required implies a level of control over planetary systems that goes far beyond any natural phenomenon or human capability. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the alignment collapsed. By 11 UTC, the air returned to its chaotic, normal state. But the data indicated the atmosphere had not simply reverted, it had been altered. The rainbow event had left a residue. Spectrometers began detecting trace amounts of a previously unknown isotope in the upper stratosphere, one that did not match any terrestrial decay chain. The prism had done more than split sunlight, it had injected matter into our air. At 13:15 UTC, 2 hours after the skies returned to normal, NASA's ER-2 high-altitude research plane, flying at 70,000 feet over the Pacific, confirmed the most alarming discovery yet. When its mass spectrometer sampled the air where refraction had been strongest, the sensors flatlined not because the air was empty, but because it was overwhelmed by a concentration of a synthetic element, Technetium, 99, suspended within a coherent carbon lattice. Pause for a moment. Technetium does not occur naturally on Earth. It has no stable isotopes and is only produced in nuclear reactors. Yet here it was, floating across the sunlit hemisphere in concentrations of 4 parts per billion. And these weren't just random particles, they were perfect microscopic tetrahedrons, billions of them, identical down to the atomic level. This was not fallout, this was nanotechnology. If this is a natural phenomenon, it overturns everything we know about cometary physics. If it is man-made, it violates international law on a planetary scale. But the implications go even further. If 3 Atlas is an artificial object, then the rainbow was never a weather event, it was a terraforming experiment. The injection of technetium into the ozone layer changes how the atmosphere absorbs ultraviolet light, altering the planet's thermal dynamics. Humanity had just been exposed to an experiment capable of modifying our entire biosphere. Within hours, the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs issued a Level 5 planetary protection alert, a warning unprecedented in 6 decades of space exploration. The rainbow had been beautiful, but the dust it left behind was actively changing the chemistry of our planet. And as the scientists scrambled to understand it, one question remained: why were these particles synchronized? Why did billions of tetrahedrons remain suspended, forming a structured planetary grid, defying wind, gravity, and the Earth's rotation? This wasn't random dispersion, this was design. The Earth had become a controlled system, and the object responsible, 180 million kilometers away, was no longer silent. By 14 UTC, the world faced a reality that no one had anticipated. The technetium particles left behind by the rainbow weren't dispersing randomly, they were holding position, forming a planetary mesh at precisely 82 kilometers altitude. Billions of microscopic tetrahedrons suspended themselves in the atmosphere, defying wind, gravity, and even the rotation of the Earth. The laws of fluid dynamics, which govern everything from hurricanes to ocean currents, were being rewritten before our very eyes. If this was a natural occurrence, then nature had achieved hive-mind-level coordination on a molecular scale. If artificial, then humanity was facing a level of planetary engineering never before witnessed. Observers quickly realized that this wasn't just a passive phenomenon. Signals from the Green Bank telescope began picking up telemetry, not from 3 Atlas to Earth but from the particles themselves, transmitting back to the object in deep space. Every hour, the density of the atmospheric mesh increased by 0.6%. At that rate, the grid would be complete within 48 hours, essentially turning the planet into a coherent, semi-structured lattice suspended in the sky. The implications were staggering. Earth itself was becoming a system controlled by an external intelligence. Scientists raced to interpret the data. The rainbow, the crystalline alignment, and now this active mesh suggested that 3 Atlas had the capability to manipulate planetary-scale energy with precision. It was not simply bending light or influencing air molecules, it was orchestrating a massive, synchronized operation on a global scale. To achieve this remotely, from 180 million kilometers away, without emitting heat, radiation, or any detectable signature of energy transfer, is something beyond even our most advanced technology. Meanwhile, atmospheric sensors continued to reveal anomalies. Communication systems, GPS signals, and satellite telemetry fluctuated subtly, suggesting that the aligned tetrahedrons weren't just static, they were interacting with electromagnetic fields around the planet. The mesh acted like a planetary-scale instrument, simultaneously absorbing, reflecting, and modulating energy. Researchers began to realize that this was more than terraforming, it was instrumentation. The entire Earth had been transformed into a living experiment, with the mesh acting as a network of probes capable of monitoring, measuring, and possibly even controlling planetary conditions. And then came the most troubling discovery. Analysis of the ongoing telemetry indicated that the particles were not inert. They were active, responding in real time to sunlight, atmospheric composition, and possibly even the biosphere below. The prime number sequence detected in the rainbow spectrum earlier suggested a deliberate, encoded method for tuning or probing Earth systems. This wasn't random dispersion, it was a communication protocol. Every tetrahedron, every particle, acted as a node in a larger planetary-scale sensor network. Experts began to grapple with the implications. If this was artificial, it required a level of engineering consistent with a Type I or even Type II civilization on the Kardashev scale, a society capable of harnessing and controlling planetary or stellar-scale energy. And yet, the source was just a comet-sized object. 3 Atlas had become a tool, a probe, and a control system rolled into one. Every action it took, from splitting sunlight into discrete bands to organizing the atmosphere, appeared meticulously calculated. The rainbow was not an aesthetic display, it was a calibration, preparing the Earth for the deployment of the mesh. As the mesh continued to grow denser, researchers faced a new question. Why? What was the purpose of this planetary lattice? Some theorists suggested environmental monitoring, a cosmic-scale scientific experiment, or even early-stage terraforming. Others, more cautiously, warned that this could be a weapon. The mesh had the capacity to influence atmospheric chemistry, thermal dynamics, and even electromagnetic systems. The tiniest adjustment could disrupt weather patterns, communications, or the planet's energy balance. Humanity had just been made visible to a force capable of manipulating the world on a fundamental level. By late afternoon, the data was undeniable. Earth was no longer passive. The rainbow had been an initiation sequence. The technetium particles had formed a functional network, and 3 Atlas, the once innocuous interstellar object, had become an architect of planetary-scale engineering. The question now was whether this was a benign experiment, a reconnaissance tool, or something far more sinister. Every hour the mesh expanded, the level of control increased. By the time night fell in the Western Hemisphere, it was clear that the Earth itself was no longer entirely under human control. And yet, even amid the growing alarm, one fact remained undeniable. The particles were synchronized, structured, and communicating. They were learning from the planet, interacting with the sun, and responding to natural phenomena. Humanity was witnessing the emergence of a planetary-scale system built entirely by an alien or highly advanced intelligence. The rainbow may have drawn our eyes skyward, but it was only the first act in an operation that had just begun. As the hours passed, the magnitude of what was unfolding became undeniable. By mid-afternoon, the atmospheric mesh formed by the technetium tetrahedrons was no longer a mere anomaly. It had become a functioning planetary installation. Satellites detected subtle but measurable changes in light scattering, atmospheric conductivity, and electromagnetic field behavior. Signals bounced in ways that had never been observed, suggesting that the mesh was not only a passive structure but an active system, capable of monitoring and possibly influencing Earth's environmental and technological networks. Every observation confirmed the same terrifying reality. 3 Atlas had turned the planet into a controlled experiment. Researchers began modeling the potential energy interactions. The concentration of technetium alone, while minuscule, was enough to alter radiative properties of the stratosphere. Calculations indicated that the mesh could influence how sunlight and ultraviolet radiation interacted with the Earth's surface. Temperature gradients, atmospheric currents, and even weather patterns could be subtly redirected. In other words, the installation was a planetary-scale tool with real, measurable influence over Earth's climate. The rainbow, the crystalline atmosphere, the suspended particles, it was all part of a single, integrated operation. Meanwhile, telemetry analysis revealed something even more alarming. The mesh wasn't inert. The tetrahedrons were responsive, maintaining structural integrity while adapting to changes in wind, solar flux, and atmospheric composition. This implied that the system had a form of feedback, a network capable of sensing, recording, and reacting in real time. Some scientists referred to it as a planetary nervous system. Unlike any weather pattern or atmospheric phenomenon, this system exhibited coherence, purpose, and adaptability. In essence, Earth had been transformed into an active sensor array, overseen from 180 million kilometers away by 3 Atlas. The encoded prime number sequence observed in the rainbow spectrum was the first hint that the system wasn't merely structural, it was communicating. Each gap, each interval, corresponded to precise mathematical signals, likely designed to calibrate or probe the planet's biosphere and physical systems. Chlorophyll in plants, hemoglobin in blood, water absorption, and atmospheric chemical composition all could be measured remotely, using spectral analysis. The rainbow had been the carrier wave, the first stage of what was now a continuous, planetary-scale scan. Governments and space agencies began issuing unprecedented alerts. The UN Office for Outer Space Affairs escalated its planetary protection protocols to Level 5. NASA and ESA engineers monitored the mesh in real time, sharing updates with meteorological and defense agencies worldwide. The public, meanwhile, had seen only the rainbow, a spectacle of beauty and awe. What they hadn't seen was the deliberate, controlled, and potentially hazardous transformation occurring above their heads. Humanity had been exposed to synthetic technetium, nanotechnology, and a coherent, responsive atmospheric lattice, all without precedent. By evening, data indicated that the installation was growing denser and more coherent. The tetrahedrons maintained exact spacing, resisting diffusion from winds, turbulence, and rotation of the planet. Even more concerning, they appeared to interact with each other, forming a self-stabilizing network. Billions of particles were acting as a single, coordinated entity, defying the natural chaos of the atmosphere. Models suggested that if the deployment continued for 48 hours, the mesh could achieve global coherence, effectively enveloping the planet in a layer of controlled matter, the potential to influence weather, communications, and energy flow on a planetary scale. Experts began considering worst-case scenarios. If this installation was intentional, it could function as a planetary-scale energy modulation system. It could monitor and influence ecosystems, block or redirect radiation, or even act as a defensive or offensive tool against satellites, communications, or other technological systems. At this point, no natural explanation could account for the precision, coordination, or scale. 3 Atlas had demonstrated the capability to manipulate an entire planetary atmosphere from a distance, without heat, mass transfer, or any conventional energy source. The rainbow wasn't the end, it was the beginning. And then, as night fell in Europe and the Americas, new telemetry signals arrived from the Green Bank telescope. The planetary mesh was actively transmitting, not just data about Earth, but feedback to 3 Atlas. The planet itself was now part of a live system, sending signals back to the interstellar object. Every measurement, every subtle variation in the atmosphere, was being recorded and sent to a distant point in space. Earth had become a component in a far larger, incomprehensibly advanced operation. The scale of this reality was impossible to overstate. Humanity had observed a global rainbow, yet the real event was invisible, ongoing, and exponentially more significant. The Technetium mesh wasn't passive, it was alive in function, and the clock was ticking. Every hour, the grid density increased, the feedback loop strengthened, and the installation expanded its influence over the planet. 3 Atlas had not merely visited, it had intervened, transforming Earth into a system operating under its remote control. As the planetary mesh continued to expand, scientists around the globe faced a sobering reality. Earth itself had become a laboratory under observation, and possibly control, by 3 Atlas. Every nanometer of technetium tetrahedron suspended in the stratosphere functioned as both sensor and communicator. The object in deep space wasn't merely a comet or interstellar visitor, it was an advanced instrument orchestrating a planetary-scale operation. By 16 UTC, telemetry confirmed that the grid had reached critical density, forming a coherent network capable of interacting with solar radiation, atmospheric chemistry, and electromagnetic fields. Analysis of the particle lattice revealed an unsettling sophistication. Unlike natural aerosols, the tetrahedrons exhibited precise geometric structures down to the atomic level. They weren't randomly distributed, they maintained orientation, spacing, and even synchronization across thousands of kilometers. The mathematical precision of the spectrum, previously observed in the rainbow gaps, was mirrored in the alignment of the particles themselves. Every data point suggested intent, engineering, and a level of design consistent with a civilization capable of manipulating planetary energy. This was no accident. As night deepened across the Pacific and Atlantic, the planetary mesh continued to transmit. The signals from Earth to 3 Atlas indicated a functional feedback system. The installation could detect changes in atmospheric composition, sunlight intensity, and possibly biological activity. In essence, the planet had become a responsive sensor network. The energy required to maintain this system, the coherence across billions of tons of air, and the absolute lack of heat emission defied thermodynamic principles. Researchers described it as a quantum-scale manipulation of matter on a planetary scale, something beyond anything ever attempted by humanity. Even more alarming were the potential consequences. The technetium particles altered the stratosphere's spectral absorption properties, meaning that ultraviolet radiation, climate patterns, and electromagnetic conditions could all be subtly modulated. While no immediate catastrophe was reported, the long-term effects remained unknown. Earth's atmosphere, once chaotic and self-regulating, was now partially structured and controlled. The planet itself had been transformed into a living, programmable system. The rainbow event, beautiful as it was, had been merely the initiation phase. Diplomatic and scientific agencies were scrambling to respond. The United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs had issued its highest planetary protection alert. Top-level briefings were underway in multiple countries, but the exact nature of the risk remained classified. The technological capabilities implied by 3 Atlas went far beyond human understanding, meaning no current defense system could respond. Humanity had been shown the sheer scale of a power capable of reshaping a planet's atmosphere at will. By 18 UTC, the grid had achieved near total coverage. The particles held their positions despite jet streams, storms, and the rotation of the Earth. The coherence was absolute. This was no longer an atmospheric anomaly, it was a fully operational installation. Every hour, the feedback loop strengthened, and the mesh continued transmitting data to deep space. 3 Atlas had effectively transformed the Earth into a hybrid planet instrument, a world now engaged in a real-time exchange with an extraterrestrial object.